Thanks very much, Manami. And good morning and good afternoon and good evening to some colleagues who I know are joining very late their time. We're really pleased to have you. We'll get our session started in just a moment, but as colleagues start to join the room, we wanted to share with you a Mentimeter to help us get started. This session is called What Now? Supporting LGBTQI plus children and families in CPHA programming. We know that this is a really urgent topic to discuss currently, and one where colleagues have differing levels of experience. We've got a really fabulous panel to share their experience and to help us explore this topic. But as colleagues enter the room, I think if you wait just a moment, our producers will share a Menti link in the chat. I can see that now. And we can put up the Menti on the screen. So while we're letting everyone join us and get ready to have this really important conversation, we can all sort of reflect, maybe you can reflect on your own context or on your experience within your own organization about what challenges and good practices have you seen in supporting LGBTQI plus children and families in child protection programming. So it's open answer. You're welcome to share as many as you like. I think it's a great way for all of us to start reflecting as the session gets started. And then very shortly, we'll have some colleagues to kick off the session for us. I see we're starting with challenges, which I certainly understand, and I hope we'll certainly get to some really wonderful and hard-earned good practices from different colleagues on the panel. But I hope you'll get the chance to share some of those as well. So we can see a few answers coming in, some of which I know we will talk about in our panel discussion today. But I see a few coming in around lack of understanding and risk aversion to the issue, that it's a taboo subject, or in some cases that there's criminalization of LGBTQI plus identities. So there's very real risks faced by practitioners and how to respond in a safe and supportive way. I see a wonderful good practice on working in partnership with LGBTQI plus organizations. We're very privileged to have a few of those with us today, and who will share their experience. And I think that will be a really important thing to reflect on. I see one which I think is a good challenge for all of us. Someone said, no practices, it's never included. And I think, and the comment that it's too sensitive to do, particularly when there's criminalization of children's identities. I think that's a good piece for us to discuss in our, to bring forward in our discussion and explore together. I see that there's a big question around getting staff trained, or I'm sorry, rather a good practice of getting staff trained by LGBTQI plus organizations, and that's been impactful for some. If you're just joining, welcome. We're really pleased to have you together with us on this session, which is exploring how we support LGBTQI plus children and their families in child protection programming in humanitarian settings. We're just starting the session with a little bit of a brainstorm on a Menti link, which we can share again in the chat for those who are just joining, about good practices and challenges. And I'm really pleased to see to see both ends of those being brought forward quite clearly and quite honestly. I see also that someone's noted an increasingly hostile environment, and that's quite a big challenge. And we've seen quite a few comments around the issue of criminalization and legal frameworks that can make it complex and increase risks for organizations who are supporting LGBTQI plus children and their families. And I see an important point around clear guidelines for humanitarian actors on this. So we're just arriving at a few minutes past the hour. Thank you to everyone who's inputted into the Mentimeter. Please do feel free to continue to do so. We will reflect on those in our panel discussion, and we'll also open up for questions after that. To get us started, one small announcement for everyone who's just joined. We will have one of our panelists who's speaking in Burmese and who will be simultaneously translated. So if you'd like to hear that person in English, please go to the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and be sure to select English. Very unfortunately, on Zoom's menu, Burmese is not an option. It's not a language label that we can select. So you will see under the globe icon that we've put Japanese. There's no interpretation into Japanese. There's interpretation into Burmese. So please excuse us for using an incorrect label. It was the only option that we had available. With that last administrative announcement, I'm really pleased to get us kicked off into the main bit of our session. We'll have a panel discussion. We've got some really great colleagues from different contexts and organizations to inspire us with different pieces of work they're doing. But to kick us off, I'm so pleased and incredibly honored to introduce Jana Panaflova, who is the founder of an organization called Teenergizer and a proud HIV plus and LGBTQI plus activist. Jana's going to give us some opening remarks. Please go ahead, Jana. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. My name is Jana Panfilova, and I'm truly honored to speak with you all of today. And until February 24, 2022, I thought that growing up with HIV was the biggest challenge I would ever face, but I was wrong. I was born in Ukraine and became one of the first children in the country born with HIV. I spent most of my life fighting stigma, shame, and silence. Growing up, I never imagined I would one day be standing here, not just a proud HIV young activist, but not just as someone who identifies with LGBTQI plus community, but as the founder of youth-led movement across Eastern Europe and Central Asia. That movement is Teenergizer. And the Teenergizer, we believe that young people are not just recipients of humanitarian aid, we are leaders, creators, and change makers. We don't need others to speak for us. We need you to speak with us, to work with us, and most of all, to trust us. For almost a decade, Teenergizer has supported adolescents across our region, including LGBTQI plus youth living with HIV and those affected by war, war, stigma, and systematic neglected. We provide mental health support, created safe space, delivered peer-led trainings, and fight for policy change, often in environments where simply being useful can be dangerous. Let me be honest, in many of our countries, including Ukraine, it's still dangerous to speak openly as a queer teenager. It's dangerous to ask for help, to talk about rights, your rights, and even just to say our light, I exist and I deserve to be safe. And yet, young people continue to show incredible courage. They speak out, they support each other, they organize. When the full-scale war began in Ukraine, LGBTQI plus teenagers were sheltering in the basement, cut off from HIV medication, mental health care, or even basic shelters. We couldn't wait for systems to respond. So we acted. We raised emergency fund, launched peer-to-peer psychological support, and started offering free online counseling available 24/7. In just a few years, the numbers of young people reached out of us has grown from 500 to over 5,000 per month. We now work with more than 400 trained peer counselors, which is the students of psychological faculty. And this is the young people helping other young people survive. They're not just a project, they are lifelines. This is the power of youth-led organization, but we should not be doing this alone. We need humanitarian systems that reflect the realities of the children, especially those who are most often ignored. We need LGBTQI plus adolescent to be seen not as a sensitive topic, but this is the core part of the child protection and psychosocial programming. And I wanted to highlight another critical point. Many Ukrainian youth, especially marginalized youth, has had to flee our country. They are found physical safety, but not always acceptance. LGBTQI plus teens living in exile often face double discrimination as a refugee and as a queer youth. They may be invisible in local services, told to stay silent about who they are and who, or forced to choose between safety and identify. Displacement should not mean erasure. That's why we need strong partnership grounded in inclusion, protection, and trust. Because inclusion isn't just about visibility, it's about survival. Every time a queer teen is told they don't belong in our programs or must hide their identity to receive support, that's not neutrality, that's harm. So today I ask you to remember this. Young people know what they need. Our voices are not weak. They are simply being silent for too long. Let's break this silence together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yana, for opening us with such inspiring and moving remarks. I think you pointed out so clearly the courage that young people are demonstrating and the clarity with which they're able to articulate their needs. And I think if we as humanitarians can demonstrate even a modicum of the courage and clarity that young people have in Ukraine and in the work that you do, I think we'll all be a lot further along on that journey to not just to inclusion, but to like greater and more fruitful collaboration. It's such a pleasure to have you with us. For the rest of the session, very shortly we'll have a panel discussion with other colleagues who will be sharing their experience. And I wanted to kind of briefly accompany some of the remarks that Jana's made to get us going. If you've been attending the Alliance annual meeting this week, many of the sessions have focused on the funding crisis, the major changes in the humanitarian system, and how both of these will impact children and their protection, and how we, as a child protection community, need to adapt, to advocate, and collectively act to continue to keep children safe. But what we have perhaps not fully explored are the drivers of these funding cuts, or not fully acknowledged. And many of you brought some of them up when we did that opening Mentimeter. There's an increasingly hostile environment with anti-gender and anti-immigrant government administrations and policies. There's been a tidal wave of discrimination against the LGBTQI plus community, and there's a surge in disrespect for international law and in violations of human rights for all people affected by conflict and crises, yes, but particularly also for women, for children, and for the LGBTQI plus community. all of these interwoven layers of discrimination, of violence and exclusion are making the world and humanitarian crises more dangerous for all children, particularly if you're a child or a family that's part of the LGBTQI plus community. Given the theme of today, I think it's important to remind ourselves that our own minimum standards for child protection and humanitarian action commit the sector to non-discrimination, to do no harm, and to inclusion and support for children in all their diversity, including children with diverse gender identities and sexual orientations, very explicitly. But several recent studies have shown that we are falling short. And you can hear from Jana's opening remarks that there is that lived experience very recently in Ukraine. We know that LGBTQI plus children and youth face disproportionate levels of inequality and discrimination before and also during a humanitarian crisis, where their identities compound the risks that all children are facing. Yet, as you heard also from Jana, LGBTQI plus children's specific needs in protection and mental health and psychosocial support are frequently overlooked in humanitarian settings. Our programs and services are often perceived as inaccessible, unsafe, or unsupportive for children and families who are LGBTQI+. New and emerging work to address these gaps in recent years has also been hampered by recent funding cuts, including the development of the first global guidance on LGBTQI+ support in child protection programming, which was being developed together with the Alliance and has been paused due to a funding termination. In spite of all these challenges, national actors and LGBTQI plus activists, like those in Teenergizer, remain all at the forefront of support for LGBTQI plus children and their families, often with limited funding or support from international organizations. In our panel today, we'll hear more from two youth and LGBTQI plus led organizations, Teenergizer, Jana, who opened the session for us, and also an organization called Asia Youth Association in Thailand, who will share their work and what they would like to see in collaborations and partnerships. We'll also hear from Berkeley's Human Rights Center about a multi-country research study that they're conducting, and from Save the Children about their work and vision for strengthening support for LGBTQI plus children in humanitarian settings. Surges in anti-rights, anti-gender, and anti-LGBTQI plus governments and movements are inherently anti-children too. The child protection community can, and we must do more to strengthen our approaches. I hope the panel today will inspire you and will drive all of us forward to greater collaboration, to more meaningful partnerships, and to collective action to support LGBTQI plus children in humanitarian crises. Without further delay, I am so pleased and incredibly privileged to introduce our panelists. We'll have Audrey Taylor, who's a senior researcher from the Human Rights Center at the University of Southern California at Berkeley. William, who's appearing here under a pseudonym, who's the founder of Asia Youth Association in Thailand. Jana Panoflova, founder of Teenergizer in Ukraine, and Warinkana Yui Mutamo, who's the director of program quality for Save the Children in Thailand. Thank you all so much for being with us. We've got such a great panel, and I'm really pleased to have you all together with us. I'd love to start with Audrey. What are you hearing from LGBTQI plus children and youth affected by humanitarian crises in some of your latest research?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Susanna. It's really a privilege to be here with you all today and share this discussion with such an inspiring group of leaders and activists. To set a little bit of the backdrop, the Human Rights Center at the University of California, Berkeley is currently conducting youth-led participatory qualitative research in both Latin America and in Europe with LGBTQI plus refugee youth between the ages of 14 and 24, as well as the service providers and activists that are supporting them. We're conducting this research in partnership with some incredible youth-led and LGBTQI plus community-based organizations. The aim of this project is to better understand the protection and mental health needs, preferences, and priorities of LGBTQI plus children and youth in humanitarian settings, and ultimately to inform global child protection guidance and case management tools for humanitarian practitioners. So to answer the original question you asked, Susanna, we're currently in the middle of data collection, so I don't have findings to share with you as such, but I do have some early observations from our research team members in both contexts. At this point in the research, some youth are sharing that for LGBTQI plus youth in their contexts, family and religious institutions are unfortunately significant sources of violence and discrimination. Many face family rejection, leading to housing insecurity, which is a particular concern among minors. In Latin America, youth report engaging in survival sex work, including online sex work, which they tell us is a common source of income for migrant youth who don't have legal documentation. Queer youth also widely perceive public spaces as unsafe, especially trans women and girls, and are reluctant to be seen in public with their partners for fear of being physically and verbally assaulted. When asked what makes LGBTQI plus youth feel safe, our research team members in Latin America tell us that some participants are responding with surprise or even hesitation at the question and saying that no one's ever asked them that before. They tell us it's the single question that takes youth the most time to answer. We're also asking youth what support services exist for LGBTQI plus youth. And so far, many, especially those in rural areas, either don't know of any services or are sharing that they largely rely on informal networks among their communities and chosen families. Throughout the study, youth participants so far have emphasized a few things that they find particularly important. Safe spaces, not just physically safe, but socially and emotionally supportive, where they don't feel judged and where they can fully trust the service providers who are there to care for them. Peer support groups and community-based activities where they can feel seen and heard and have space to fully express themselves. Equal rights, including marriage rights, rights to safety, and anti-discrimination, both in terms of existing laws and also in terms of what laws are enforced and on behalf of whom. Employment and legal documentation, especially for migrant youth, support for HIV-related health concerns, and then generally youth are stressing that they just want to be seen and celebrated for who they are and treated as humans, not as stereotypes. So that's a little bit that I have to share so far. Our research is set to be completed late summer with findings released in the fall. So please keep an eye out. We will be sharing them through the Alliance and through our website. I know we'll have a lot more in the coming months.
Thank you so much, Audrey. I think some really important initial observations and a really good push for us as child protection actors to understand the power of a simple question, where just the idea of feeling and being safe is something that requires reflection because it's so unfamiliar to children. It's a very good challenge for us to reflect on, I think. I would love to turn to William now. Could you talk a little bit about your experience at your organization and the role that communities and national organizations are playing in protecting LGBTQI plus children and their families?
Yeah ကျွန်တော်အနေနဲ့ကျွန်တော်နာမည်ကတော့ William လို့ခေါ်ပါတယ်ကျွန်တော်မြန်မာပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်ထိုင်းမှာဆရာနာသိမ်းမှုကြောင့်လက်ခံကြောင်းနေထိုင်လာပြီးတော့အခုမှာ Asia Youth Association ဆိုတဲ့ Foundation Association တွေကိုတည်ထောင်ပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်လူငယ်တွေပြီးရင်မျိုးသမီးတွေဒီ LGBT ကလေးငယ်တွေရဲ့အခွင့်အရေးနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးလည်ဆက်မှာစတင်ပြီးလှုပ်ရှားဆောင်ရွက်နေတာဖြစ်ပါတယ်အဲ့တော့အထူးသဖြင့်ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီနေ့နဲ့ပတ်သက်တာတက်စားလို့ရှိရင် LGBT ကလေးနဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့အခါမျိုးတွေမှာပို့ပြီးတော့ rich တွေများတယ်တနည်းအားဖြင့်ဘာသာရေးထုံးတမ်းစနစ်အစဉ်အလာတွေကမိသားစုတွေကလက်တနည်းအားဖြင့်ကျွန်တော်တို့ကျောင်းတွေက traditional ရိုးရာရလက်မခံတဲ့အပိုင်းတွေရှိတယ်ဒီပိုင်းတွေနဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီ LGBT ကလေးတွေတွားပြီးတော့ကိုယ်တဲ့ခံမျိုးတွေမှာမိသားစုကလက်သက်မခံတဲ့အပိုင်းတွေရှိတယ်။သူနဲ့အခြေအတင်စကားပြောရတဲ့အပိုင်းတွေရှိတယ်။နောက်ပြီးတော့သူတို့တွေအနေနဲ့ဒီ LGBT ကလေးတွေရဲ့ sexual orientation ကိုလုံးဝ access မဖြစ်တဲ့အပိုင်းတွေလည်းရှိတယ်။ဒါကြောင့်မလို့ကျွန်တော်တို့သူတို့ကိုဒီပံ့ပိုးပြရမယ်လို့ပြောပြီးတော့မြည့်အခါမျိုးတွေမှာမိဘတွေကကျွန်တော်တို့နဲ့တူတွေ့ဆုံဆွေးနွေးဖို့အတွက်ကိုလက်ခံတဲ့အပိုင်းတွေရှိတယ်။ကျွန်တော်တို့တွေအနေနဲ့ သူတို့လက်ခံလာအောင်လို့သွားပြီးတော့ဆွေးနွေးရတယ်ကြိမ်ရေပေါင်းများစွာတွေ့ဆုံရတယ်ပြီးလို့ရှိရင်သူတို့လက်ခံလာဖို့တော့ကျွန်တော်တို့အမျိုးဆုံးစကားတွေပြောရတယ်ကတော့မှဒီကလေးတွေပေါ့ဒါတွေဆိုင်ရာပံ့ပိုးကူညီမှုလားရုပ်ပိုင်းဆိုင်ရာပံ့ပိုးကူညီမှုလားအခုစားတောက်ပိုင်းဆိုင်ရာပံ့ပိုးအဲ့ဒါဒီအကြောင်းအရာတွေကိုကျွန်တော်တို့သိထားပြီးတော့မှကျွန်တော်အဓိကဆိုင်ရာတနည်းအားဖြင့်ဒီကတားမှုပေါ်ပိုင်းမှာသူ့ရဲ့စိတ်ကို relax လုပ်ဖို့လိုအပ်တဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်မို့လို့ကျွန်တော်တို့သူ့ကိုတည်ငြိမ်တဲ့နေရာသူ့အတွက်စိတ်လုံခြုံမဲ့နေရာတွေမှာကျွန်တော်တို့တွားရောက်ပြီးတော့မှထိတ်ဆက်ပြီးတော့မှပို့ဆောင်ပေးရတဲ့အပိုင်းတွေရှိတယ်။ဒီ Facebook တွေချက်တာတွေဒါတွေကလည်းအများအားလို့မရှိနေဘူး short time အနေနဲ့ပဲရှိနေတဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်မလို့ကျွန်တော်တို့အနေနဲ့အများကြီးပံ့ပိုးကူညီမှုမပေးနိုင်ဘူးဒီအဖြစ်ကျွန်တော်တို့အဖွဲ့အားကလည်းพัฒนาအဖွဲ့အစည်းတွေနဲ့ချိတ်ဆက်ပြီးလုပ်ရတဲ့အခါမှာကျွန်တော်တို့မှာကိုယ်ပိုင် credit မရှိတဲ့အခါမှာဒီ LGBT ကလေးတွေviolence တစ်ခုဖြစ်တဲ့ကျူးလွန်ခံရတဲ့ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကျွန်တော်တို့ဖိနဲ့မပေးနိုင်တဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်မလို့ဒါတွေကိုကျွန်တော်တို့အများအားတွေ့ကြုံနေရတယ်ပြီးတော့နေဆက်ဒေတာမှာဖြစ်တဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်မလို့တနည်းအားဖြင့်အမျိုးသမီးတွေကလေးတွေပြီးရင်ရွှေ့ပြောင်းလုပ်သမားတွေကအများအားလို့ဖယ်ခြားဆက်ဆံခြင်းခံနေရတယ်လို့ LGBT ကလေးငယ်တွေကလည်းအများအားလို့ abuse လုပ်ခံနေရတယ်တနည်းအားဖြင့် migrant ရွှေ့ပြောင်းကျောင်းတွေမှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင် digital security ကိုမရှိနေနဲ့အောက်ဖြတ်ကျူးလွန်ပြီးတော့ဒီကလေးတွေရဲ့ privacy ကိုဆရာတွေကဝင်ကြည့်တဲ့ပုံစံမျိုး case တွေကျွန်တော်တို့ကြားရတယ်ပြီးရင်ကျောင်းဆရာတွေကပဲကလေးတွေ abuse လုပ်တဲ့အပိုင်းတွေviral abuse လုပ်တဲ့အပိုင်းတွေကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ကျွန်တော်တို့ရှိ case တွေရောက်လာတဲ့ဘိုင်းတွေရှိတယ်။ဒါရင်းနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့လည်းကျွန်တော်တို့ကိုင်တွယ်ပေးခဲ့ရတဲ့တာရကတွေလည်းအများကြီးရှိပါတယ်။တနည်းအားဖြင့်တချို့သောကိစ္စတွေမှာကျွန်တော်တို့ဒါကိုအစိုးရကိုထိရောက်အောင်တွားပြောမယ်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်တနည်းအားဖြင့် migrant ကျောင်းတွေမှာက illegal ကလေးတွေများတယ်သူတို့အပိုင်းနဲ့ပတ်သက်လို့ရှိရင်တို့တိကျရောက်အစိုးရရုံသွားတိုင်ပြီဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ဒီကျောင်းကမှာဖြစ်တဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်မလို့တခြားကလေးတွေရဲ့ပညာရေးကိုတွားပြီးထိခိုက်နိုင်တယ်ဒီလိုအခြေအနေမျိုးတွေမှာကျွန်တော်တို့ကသက်ဆိုင်ရာမိခင်ဖွဲ့စည်းတွေနဲ့ပဲဆွေးနွေးပြီးတော့မှသာလျှင်ကျွန်တော်တို့သဘောတူညီချက်လုပ်ရတဲ့အဲကြောင့်မလို့တွေကအစိုးရရှိတိုက်ရိုက်တော့မရောက်သွားဘူးမိခင်ဖွဲ့စည်းတွေရှိရဲ့မိခင်အဖွဲ့အစည်းတွေရှိတဲ့တင်ရအောင်ပဲကျွန်တော်တို့ report တွေအနေနဲ့ရောက်သွားတယ်။ဒါကြောင့်မလို့ကျွန်တော်တို့ဘယ်ဆောင်ရှင်တယ်ထို့အကြောင်းသားတွေထို့လူငယ်တွေထို့ LGBT ကလေးတွေရဲ့ HIV ပိုးပြန့်နှံ့မှုတွေကလည်းတဖြည်းဖြည်းနဲ့များလာတယ်။ဒါနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့လည်းတော့World Vision နဲ့လည်းစကားပြောနေရရှိပါတယ်။ကျွန်တော်တို့အနေနဲ့ဒီလိုများပြီးနိုင်ရက်တွေပြီးရင်ဒါနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးဘယ်လိုမျိုးပံ့ပိုးပေးနိုင်လဲဆိုတဲ့ကိစ္စရက်တွေကိုလည်းစကားပြောပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့လက်ရှိမှာဆွေးနွေးဒါကလက်ရှိမဲဆောက်မှာကျွန်တော်တို့တွေ့ကြုံနေရတဲ့အပိုင်းဖြစ်တယ်အားလုံးကျေးဇူးအများကြီးတင်ပါတယ်မရှင်းနိုင်ဘူးပြန်ပြီးနိုင်ပါတယ်
Thank you so much, William. I think it's really important how you've kind of outlined this really clear kind of engagement that AYA is having with LGBTQI plus children directly in their families, in schools, but that you're doing all of this with really limited funding. So while you have the energy and the commitment and the relationship building school skills to support these children when they have a really concrete need that requires more significant funding, that you are struggling to meet it. And also I really appreciated how you were outlining the sort of layers of discrimination and the levels of challenges, especially for LGBTQI plus children and families who are displaced and who don't have legal status, because obviously that's an added complication that they're trying to navigate through, and a really difficult one when they're in need of services but can't access them because of their status. Some really important things for us to reflect upon. I guess in that context, I'd love to turn to Jana next. It sounds like a fair few challenges that AYA is facing in how they're responding and the support that they might need. From your perspective at Teenergizer, what should we be doing better? If you had some key demands for humanitarian actors, for UN agencies, there'll be a fair few in the room. What would you like to tell them?
Okay, thank you so much for this question. So here what I would say clearly and direct First of all, name us and include us. Too many humanitarian programs still avoiding saying LGBTQI+ youth, children, or adolescents out of fear, politics, or discomfort. But when you don't name us, you erase us. So queer adolescents exist in war zone, in refugee camps, and shelter in every country. And we have special needs that cannot be met with generic solutions. Inclusion starts with visibility, say the words, train your staff, make programs safe and welcoming for all young people, including LGBTQI+ teenagers. So the second one is fund youth-led organization. Young people, including those from LGBTQI+ communities, are already doing the work. We run mental health support, peer consultations, digital helpline, but the funding we receive is small, short-term, and often come with impossible conditions. So don't just say we are important, show it. Give flexible long-term support and youth-led initiative. Trust us to lead. And the third and last one, protect us online. In today's world, the internet is often the online space where queer teens can ask for help, connect, and just breathe. But it's also a space full of dangerous surveillance, blackmail, hate speech, and we need investment in digital space, confidential support, and platform desire with our reality in mind. So in short, say our names, fund our work, protect our rights everywhere, including online. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Yana. Three very clear and incredibly important demands. I know we've sort of touched on the first two in other parts of our conversation, but I think your last point about support and protection in the online space is such a critical one. And I think one that's terribly underfunded and under-discussed in humanitarian settings. So thank you very much for that push, a really important one for us to reflect on. I'd love to turn to Yui now. We've heard from AYA and from Teenergizer about their experiences and the criticality of including and naming LGBTQI+ children and families and organizations. But we've also heard from lots of colleagues responding on the Mentimeter about all of the risks to humanitarian actors to engaging in this space. Maybe could you talk to us about how do you manage risks when providing tailored support to LGBTQI+ children in different challenging contexts?
So much, and thank you for having me today, everyone. I think for Save the Children Thailand's experience, one of their very key points to manage risk is thinking about the prioritizing do no harm. That's the first principle that we hold. And that means we need to always assess potential risks before doing any activities, especially if they involve public visibility. And we have to avoid actions that could unintentionally expose a child's identity or increase their vulnerability. Sometimes we tend to really want to advocate for themselves, but we need to give them some space and respect a child's pace in coming out or expressing their identities, and make it their choice in sharing their identity. And also we work with a wide ranges of community-based organizations, CSO, INGO as well. In some of the conservative settings, many of us tend to use a strong language. So one of the things that we think could help managing the risk is framing the rights-based language with care, and maybe focusing on a universal values like dignity, safety, well-being, and inclusion. And I think these are often more acceptable than directly naming SOGI rights in public sphere. And maybe when you work with religious leaders or, community leaders who are quite conservative, facing like all children have the right to feel safe, be respected, and express who they are, rather than using politicized terms that could trigger backlash. This could be also helpful and helping us to match the risk as well. Developing a risk and response plans that could include, one of the things that Yana has mentioned on online bullying or hate speech. I think it's really important to have that kind of messaging guidance for responding to criticism or misinformation, and plans to have a support system in place for children with diversity, either on legal and psychosocial support is also very important. Some of us as well, as we learn along the ways from bad practices, if I would say, rather than trying to amplify the voices by exposing the children. Maybe it's also good to amplify without exposing them as well. For example, using aggregated data, anonymous stories, or using adult alliance to raise awareness without exposing children directly. And this could also be very, very powerful as well if we can use some evidence, some findings, some research. In Thailand, we also have recently we have a mental health research on LGBTQI children, which is really, really powerful in using that kind of evidence and messages to advocate for them. I think, there's a lot more to talk about our experience and existing practice, let's say, not really a good practice, all of them, but we still learn, and working with partners like community-based child rights organizations who understand the issues, or LGBTQI plus organizations is also the key. Collaborating with them, with this group, are more likely to be more meaningful, be more accepted and sustained. And these partnerships can also help identify and support children who may otherwise remain invisible due to stigma or fear, or conflicts or displacement that they are facing. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Yui. I really appreciated all of the kind of practical ways that you outlined your kind of managing risks, but also the kind of maybe emerging good practices and the way that you are learning together with partners and communities, I think is really critical. And I think it's a really interesting one for us to reflect on as a child protection community, because we're always pushing for child participation, but at the same time, we're trying to manage risk. So you'd really artfully described how you are achieving both, but just in a slightly different way to make sure that it is safe for the children and families involved. So I really appreciate that. I have one more question for all of the panelists before we turn to the Q&A. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom. So if you have a question for us, please do feel free to start putting those in there. So if I could turn to each of the panelists, I think the last thing I would love to ask is, if you could ask each person attending, there's about 69 of us in the room, to do one thing after this session, today, tomorrow, next week, one thing to better support LGBTQI plus children and their families, what would be your one action, your one call to action for all of us? Maybe I can start with Audrey.
Sure. At risk of sounding like a bit of a broken record, I'm going to reinforce things that Yana, William, and Yui have already said. And that is, I'm actually going to give you two actions. First, take responsibility to educate yourselves and your teams in core LGBTQI plus competencies, and challenge yourself to engage in the difficult work of self-reflection and open discussions to address discomfort and internal prejudice. Because whether you know it or not, if you're working with children and youth, you are working with LGBTQI plus children and youth. And then the second bit of that is please partner with and fairly compensate LGBTQI plus community-based organizations, especially youth-led groups. You've heard from Yana and William at two incredible ones. Groups like these hold a wealth of knowledge and local contextual expertise. And most importantly, they have the trust of the communities they serve. So partnering with them will help to ensure the development of safe and effective services, but also sustain the capacity of these organizations to continue to provide the support, particularly when you're operating in environments where these services are criminalized.
Thank you so much, Audrey. I'd love to turn to William with the same question. William, I think you're muted, if you can unmute.
Yeah, thank you. ဒီလိုမျိုးပြောခွင့်ပေးလို့ကျေးဇူးအများကြီးတင်ပါတယ်။ကျွန်တော်တို့အနေနဲ့ပံ့ပိုးမှုတစ်စုံစရာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်တော့ဒီကလေးတွေရဲ့စိတ်ပိုင်းဆိုင်ရာလုံခြုံမှုအတွက်အဓိကအဖြစ် shelter တွေနောက်ပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့စစ်တဲ့ children နဲ့အတူတူပူးပေါင်းဆောင်ရွက်နေတဲ့ social right တွေနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့စာသင်ကျောင်းတွေမှာဒါတွေနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့ပုံမကျပြန့်မှုလိုတယ် awareness တွေဖြစ်ဖို့လိုတယ်နောက်ပြီးတော့ community based learning center တွေမှာလည်းကျွန်တော်တို့ social နဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့အကြောင်းအရာတွေ gender equality နဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့အကြောင်းအရာတွေကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ community ထဲမှာကြည်ပြတ်သွေးသွင်းတယ်လို့မျိုးကျွန်တော်တို့ဝင်သွားဖို့လိုအပ်တယ်အခုကာလမှာကျွန်တော်တို့ဘလောက်ပဲ21ရာစုနှစ်ဖြစ်ပလိနေစေကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီ LGBT တွေပြီးလို့ရှိရင် gender equality နဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့အကြောင်းအရာတွေကယနေ့ချိန်ထိကအရေးကြီးနေတဲ့ subject တစ်ခုဖြစ်နေတော့မယ်ဒါကြောင့်မလို့ကျွန်တော်တို့ gender equality
because the channel switched.
Sorry,
Susan.
အဲ့တဖြစ်ကျွန်တော် LGBT right ကလေးငယ် right အားလုံးကဆက်ဆက်နေတဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်မလို့ကျွန်တော်တို့အခြေခံအုတ်မြစ်ဖြစ်တဲ့အကြောင်းတွေနဲ့ပြီးလို့ရှိရင် community base မှာရှိနေတဲ့အရာတွေဒါတွေနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့
Sorry, there was a little bit of a challenge and a change with the channel being switched. So I think many of us just switched over and got the last bit. I think if we can all switch to the English bit now. I'm so sorry, William. Would you mind like briefly summarizing again? We don't want to. I've got the tail end, but I want to make sure everyone gets every bit of your wisdom.
Okay. So ကျွန်တော်တို့ပံ့ပိုးမှုတစ်စုံတရာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်เนาะကျွန်တော်တို့လက်ရှိမှာsocial right နဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့စိတ်သက် children နဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့လက်ရှိ awareness right တွေ scaling တွေ community based ကလူငယ်တွေနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့လက်ရှိမှာလုပ်နေရရှိရယ်နောက်တစ်ခုက migrant learning center တွေမှာလည်းကျွန်တော်တို့ LGBT နဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့ပူဝါဒတွေ policy တွေပေါ်ဆောင်မှာပတ်သက်လို့လည်းကျွန်တော်တို့အရေးကြီးတယ်နောက်ပြီးတော့ community based တွေမှာရှိနေတဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ပြည်သူတွေနဲ့ communicate လုပ်တဲ့နေရာတွေမှာကျွန်တော်တို့ gender equality တွေပြီးရင် body rights တွေပြီးရင်ကျွန်တော်တို့ child right တွေဒါတွေနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့ထဲဝင်လုပ်နိုင်ဖို့အတွက်အများကြီးလိုအပ်တယ်နောက်ပြီးတော့ဒီကျွန်တော်တို့ sexual abuse ဒါမှမဟုတ်ရင် violent abuse တယောက်ဖြစ်သွားတဲ့ LGBT ကလေးငယ်တယောက်ကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ပြန်လည်ကုစားပေးဖို့အတွက်သူတင်ငင်စွာနေထိုင်နိုင်ဖို့အတွက်ကျွန်တော်တို့ shelter တွေပြီးသူ့အတွက်စားတောက်တွေပြီးရင်သူ့ကိုပြန်ပြီးတော့ trauma healing လုပ်နိုင်ဖို့အတွက် psychological support တွေပေးနိုင်ဖို့အတွက်ကျွန်တော်တို့အရင်ရေးကြည့်ပါတယ်ဒါတွေကကျွန်တော်တို့လက်တွေ့မှာပံ့ပိုးမှုတစ်စုံတစ်ရာရမယ်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ဒီဟာတွေအကောင့်တွေပေါ်သွားဖို့လဲကျွန်တော်တို့မှာ capacity building အပြည့်ရှိတယ် human resource တွေနဲ့အပြည့်အဝရှိပါတယ်ကျွန်တော်တို့လာမယ့်ကာလတွေမှာလည်းကျွန်တော်တို့စစ်ဆောင်ဒေတာကနေပြီးတော့ပညာလာသင်ကြားတဲ့ကလေးတွေနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့စိတ်ကျန်းမာရေးနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတောင်းရတွေကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ဆရာများအဖွဲ့အစည်းတွေကျွန်တော်တို့သင်တန်းပေးသွားမိမယ့်အပိုင်းတွေရှိတယ်အဲ့ကာလမှာလည်းကျွန်တော်တို့ကဒီ activity ကလေးငယ်တွေတယောက်ကိုဘယ်လိုကင်တွယ်မလဲဘယ်လိုဖြည့်ရှင်းမလဲသူစိတ်တန်ရာရနေတယ်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ဘယ်လိုကုစားပေးမလဲဆိုတဲ့အကြောင်း policy တွေနဲ့ထည့်သွင်းပြီးပါဖို့ရှိပါတယ်Thank you. ကျေးဇူးအများကြီးတင်ပါတယ်အခုလိုပြောဖို့
Thank you so much, William. I think tons of plans and possibility for AYA and all of the things that you would like to do, and I hope that pushes participants to think about different ways that they might partner with organizations like yours and all of the possibility of the work there. Can I turn to Yana next?
Thank you so much. So first of all, I would like to see like a little bit say over what now we see from the world. So the human rights are the huge attacks, like from radical groups, from and you can see, for example, last year with the Biden administration, we can make advertisement, for example, for use LGBT. But today, Facebook reject us to make something. So we could see immediately change from the businesses, from the government, especially from US government, just like feels like they support Russian like family values, which is for us, I mean, like it's incredibly shameful. So I would probably say that we need to stay positive, because, for example, in Netherlands, the Netherlands now, the government collapsed, which is a right-wing government right now. So I hope we will see that some government collapse. I mean, like who spread hates, misinformation, disinformation, and probably say, stay united and stay positive. And this, we need to save our hopes, and we need to save our fight back to this. I mean, like, I don't know, they want to get us back, so we need to be in the future and fight for this.
I think really clear: stay united, stay positive, and keep fighting, keep advocating. Don't give up, basically. Really good. Thank you so much, Shana. And to Yui.
Yes, I will also repeat what Audrey said, that we encourage you to collaborate with LGBTQI plus organizations and communities to revisit and strengthening whatever practices or existing protection mechanisms in your communities, and keep the conversation going. If you cannot directly advocate for SOGI inclusion, maybe start from opening spaces for LGBTQI children to meaningfully engage in your design, in the implementation and evaluation programs that may affect them. And their voices should be, helping us a lot in shaping our interventions that are truly responsive to their needs and realities. It can start with building spaces to talk about their well-being, their self-awareness, and help them explore who they are, their likes, their dislikes, their personalities, their feelings. Self-awareness lays the foundation for understanding gender identity. And keep in mind that inclusion is not optional, it's essential. That's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yui. I think a good one for us to take away. It's not optional, it's essential. And certainly it's a good reminder that this is also in our minimum standards, and this is in our humanitarian principles. So this is something that we have to be creative and have courage to find solutions around. I really appreciate that and all of your calls to action. We do have a bit of time left in our session for questions and answers. So the Q&A function is there at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question, or if you'd like to, if you're not quite finding that and you'd like to put a question for our panelists in the chat, please do feel free. I see one there already. I can maybe put this to any of the panelists who are quite keen to answer. When we're talking about maintaining the privacy of children, one of our colleagues is noting that often it's international organizations who are putting children's situations kind of up front and center in their communications in times of crises. So would any panelists like to add their perspective in terms of like protecting the identities of children, and how are we, I think this is another question around how we're managing risk in a practical way. Yui, I don't know if you would like to say anything more about that from Save the Children's perspective.
Thank you. I was trying to think how to answer this as well, but maybe coming from our experience, it's always good to start from hearing what the children needs, but also help them understand what's going to happen as a backlash as well, that the negative effects after that. They always be very courageous. Many of them are working at the front lines, being an activist, and do not know that there are a lot more backlash, negative impact after that when they expose themselves online or even in a public spaces. And international organization or even the UN agencies are not thinking through when assessing the risk and thinking about the safeguarding measures. So I would say start with talking with everyone, every stakeholders who are engaged in that activities, in that campaigns or advocacy, and go through the standards, maybe safeguarding checklist. For LGBTQI children, it might be more appropriate to do a thorough kind of risks that are associated with cultures, norms, understanding of the communities as well. And as I said, sometimes we use adult alliance or even evidence or aggregated data from research. It also helpful and also powerful the same way that we want to use the children and youth as a direct advocate. So if you go through those safeguarding kind of checklists or standards, it will help you be more aware of what needs to be prepared beforehand. Support system, as Yana and William stated, for example, their child rights specialists or anybody that could help them, backing them up after all of these activities that they do is really important. The mental health issues and handling with all the negative comments are also very important, and would help them going through this or doing that campaigns more safely, say. Don't know, Yana and William, as a real advocates, you have any comments on that as well?
Yes, I have. အဓိကအဖြစ်ကကျွန်တော်တို့ကလေးတွေပတ်သက်တဲ့ကိစ္စတွေကင်တွယ်တဲ့ခါမျိုးတွေမှာပြဿနာကိုရင်းဆုံးဆွေးမှာပြောသွားတယ်လို့နားထောင်ပြီးသွားတာနဲ့တပြိုင်နက်တည်းသူ့ရဲ့ ID တွေမှာကျွန်တော်မှတ်ပုံတင်တောင်းတဲ့ကိစ္စရက်တွေပြီးရင်ဓာတ်ပုံရိုက်တဲ့ကိစ္စရက်တွေညာတွေကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ကအရင်သတိထားဖို့လိုတယ်တတိယဖြစ်ကျွန်တော်တို့တချို့တော့ဒိုနာတွေကိုပြန်တင်ရတဲ့အပိုင်းတွေပြီးလို့ရှိရင်ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီကလေးတွေရဲ့အကြောင်းအရာနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့အစိုးရကိုပြန်တင်တဲ့အပိုင်းတွေမှာ history ကတောက်လျှောက်ကြီးပါသွားတာဖြစ်တဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်မလို့တနည်းအားဖြင့်ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီအပိုင်းတွေကိုဖတ်ထားဖို့လိုတယ်တနည်းအားဖြင့်သူ့ case ကို study လုပ်ပြီးဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကကျွန်တော်တို့တွေက nickname ပေးပြီးတော့မှကျွန်တော်တို့ဒီ case ကိုတိုင်းတာလို့သူ့ case ကိုမဖြေရှင်းခင်မှာကျွန်တော်တို့သူ့ကိုထောက်ထားပြီးတော့မှသူနဲ့စကားပြောတဲ့အပိုင်းတွေကိုဖျောက်ထားဖို့လိုတယ်ပြီးတော့မှဖြေရှင်းနေတဲ့ကာလမျိုးမှာရလက်ထက်လာပြီဆိုတဲ့ကာလမှာကြာတော့မှဒီနစ်နာခံတဲ့နစ်နာသွားတဲ့ကလေးကိုကျွန်တော်တို့အပြင်ထုတ်လာပြီးတော့မှအပြစ်ကျူးလွန်တဲ့သူအပြစ်ပေးတဲ့အပိုင်းတွေကိုကျွန်တော်တို့စဉ်းစားဖို့လိုအပ်တယ်ပေါ့နော်ဒါကြောင့်မို့ကျွန်တော်တို့လေးတွေနဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့အရာမျိုးတွေမှာကျွန်တော်တို့ identity ကလေးတွေကပို့ပြီးဆိုပါတယ်သူတို့ပြောဆိုတဲ့နေရာမျိုးတွေမှာသုံးနှုန်းတဲ့ pronouns တွေကကြာအစအရင်ရေးကြည့်တယ်သူတို့မိသားစုတွေကမိသားတွေကဒီပုံမောင်တစ်ပါးတွေကသူတို့ကိုဘယ်လိုမျိုးခေါ်တာလဲဆိုတဲ့အပိုင်းတွေအဲ့ဒါတွေကိုလည်းကျွန်တော်တို့ကပို့ပြီးတတိထားရမယ်တတိချက်ကမယ်အပိုင်းဒီ21ရာစုမှာကလေးတွေရဲ့အသိပညာကနှိမ့်စင်တဲ့အများဖွံ့ဖြိုးတိုးတက်လာတာဖြစ်တဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်မလို့သူတို့တွေရဲ့စိတ်ပိုင်းဆိုင်ရာကလည်းအမြဲတမ်းလို့ကျွန်တော်တို့စိတ်ပိုင်းဆိုင်ရာထိခိုက်မှုတွေရှိတယ်အကြောင်းမှာတော့၎င်းပြီးတော့အိမ်မှာတော့၎င်း social media မှာတော့၎င်းဒါတွေကိုလည်းကျွန်တော်တို့ကသူတို့နဲ့အများနဲ့ထိတွေ့ဆက်ဆံနေပြီးတော့ဆွေးနွေးနေဖို့လိုအပ်တဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်မလို့ကလေးတွေနဲ့ကင်တွယ်တဲ့ခါမျိုးတွေမှာအဓိကအဖြစ် personal data တွေကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ရှော့ချနိုင်ကြများရှော့ချနိုင်ဖို့အတွက်ကိုအသင်းစဉ်းစားဖို့ကိုအကြံပြုကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်
Thank you so much to both William and Yuri. I think both of you were really clear on starting with the children and their families and communities, and making sure that the sort of care and trust is built, and that you're making these decisions together about any information that's shared. And I loved, William, also the care and trust that you're building directly with the child, and how you call them, how they want to be called, how do they need to be called in their family if that's a safer thing. I think all of the I think it's an important push for us as child protection actors. We know about data protection and privacy, we know about consent, but it's going the extra level and the extra care to build this trust, and to be very mindful and very thoughtful at every stage of the process. And I think you both kind of pushed us on that front. We have one last question that I might like to point. I might actually ask Jana if she would like to answer this one. A colleague is noting that LGBTQI plus children experience discrimination and also gender-based violence, both within their families and in their communities. I wonder if they're asking about what are some effective ways that these children can be supported in manners that are safe, inclusive, and also empowering, especially in humanitarian settings. I know you have a fair amount of experience in that, so maybe you could talk about some of the methodologies that have been effective in your experience.
So from our backgrounds, we know peer-to-peer approach is the best way to help and to support. And from Ukrainian reality, back to Soviet Union, and we in Soviet Union, our grandma, granddad doesn't have talks about their emotions, about their actually they don't have a sex officially, and so on. So that's why our parents and that generation didn't know how to speak with the children about emotions, sex, comprehensive sexuality education, and so on, especially if we are talking LGBTQI+. So the topic of the sexuality and everything is very sensitive for post-Soviet countries. So that's why all the society trying to avoiding talking about these topics. And that's why peer-to-peer is the best, because a teenager is easily to talk with their friends from schools or from different other spaces. So that's why we are create peer-to-peer counseling. And the model of teenager actually is created by teenagers. So they create the program, they create the project. So they are actors to do and to realize themselves, no matter who you are, who you love, and what kind of disease you have. This is the essential, this is the safe space for them to feel that they are needed. And that's why they have big potential and so many energy, and sometimes they put their energy in not interesting way. I mean, like to use drugs, to use like other things. And the another way, I think the mental health is very essential, because for last 10 years we work a lot in HIV area, and we understand the young people, they use the drugs because the mental health, they use the drinks because the mental health, or for example they have ADHD problem, yeah, so they feel more depressed. And for example, if you're a young gay, or you just non-binary person, you don't have the great space, you don't have the space to talk with. If for example you're the small village, or you're the capital of the Ukraine, for example, or for example during this Pride month, our local like Kyiv city changed his avatar, like the LGBT, and too many like radical groups just say like, oh my God, you support this. And some parliamentarians also share the homophobic space. So that's why young people and the adolescents, it's easy to be like hide in the shadows, because it feels like it's more safe. But I'm so happy that Canadian ambassador just share and just a little bit back, make it back and say like, okay, guys, we are protect democracy and everybody. So it's great. So that's why I think if we are engaged too many actors who can speak loud, I think that would be great, that young people feel they're not really alone. So that's why peer-to-peer is a great, because we need to create the first experience, a good experience, because the first experience is, I think it play a crucial role in the essential life. So that's why we little bit break this stigmatized. So that's why we create the good first experience as peer-to-peer counseling, for example.
Thank you so much, Jana. A really great exploration of the impact of peer-to-peer counselling on multiple levels for the children and youth involved. I'm looking at the time, and as is always the case with really critical discussions like this, we're coming to the end of it too soon. I would love to sit here with all of you for another hour, and I hope that this is the beginning of a discussion. So first of all, a very huge thank you to all of our remarkable panelists and to everyone here today for engaging in this really urgent discussion. I know we'll have lots more discussions today about the importance of humanitarian principles and standards and how we prevent a rollback of them. I hope this session has inspired you to take a look at that specifically for LGBTQI plus children, and recognizing that they're not emerging needs, they're part of our communities and living at the intersection of multiple forms of violence and discrimination. Today's panel has highlighted what works, particularly really pushing us for the importance of meaningful partnerships with LGBTQI plus movements and youth-led action. National actors are really holding the line, and we as international actors and in international spaces need to do better. We can't speak of localization if we're sidelining the very communities that are most at risk. So I hope that this session is a turning point and a call to action where we can all do more and have more courage and creativity in our programs and in our daily work, so that we are upholding the promise of our minimum standards and our humanitarian principles for LGBTQI plus children. I'll hand it over to the producers now, and just a huge thank you again to our panelists. It's been such a privilege.